So another kind of fun learning technique, just you can use this with anything, but with music I'm starting to realize it's really, really useful to use, is this idea of mnemonics. So mnemonics, a lot of people kind of like to, use them to remember things like numbers or like facts for tests and stuff, but when you're working on a piece of music, or like learning new music techniques, especially like chords, it's great to do these with chords, it's really useful to apply memory techniques, because the fact is that a lot of things in music can be really dry. I mean, it's like, this is just a bunch of frets. Like, there's no color to them, there's no irregularity to them. There's like things that are flat don't tend to go into the memory well. They're just not, there's nothing about them to remember. They're all the same. So the memory likes things that are irregular. So what you can do is you can take things that are flat, just like a bunch of like random frets and like a random melody on them, which you could say is just a bunch of numbers and tabs, and you could add something to it from another part of your mind. You can associate it with something else that helps you remember what it is. So I think one of my favorite ways to do this is with chords. There's a lot of ways to do this, but like if you're, let's say you're trying to learn new chord shapes, and you learn, okay, like that's a major chord shape on the bass, but it's just like a fret and two frets back, and then the two frets next to each other on these three strings. I've never found that very memorable. It's just blah to me, and it is a lot of people. So what I like to do, especially with chords, is I like to think of constellations. I just imagine every note that I play is a dot. It's like a star in the sky, and I'm like, if this were a constellation, what would it be? For me, for this one, I always see like a knight in chess, like the way a knight in chess goes, kind of that way and then to that way. It's not exactly how it would go exactly by spaces, but to me, it kind of makes sense. I mean, in a way, it's kind of two frets back and then two strings over. A knight in chess doesn't quite move 2 and 2, but that's actually not the important thing. The important thing is what I see. If I see it as a knight in chess, it makes it easier to remember. If I move this over here to the minor shape, I actually don't see a knight in chess anymore, even though technically it's more correct. I more see like a little fish hook. I see like a little. So to me, this is a knight in chess, this is a fish hook. But really, they're just two shapes with like 1 fret difference. But my imagination has now taken these things that are like mathematically almost identical and made them drastically dissimilar, made them more unique. And that's what your memory likes. Your memory likes things that are unique and kind of twisted and different. And so I think an example I'd really like to use, I'm going to grab my ukulele here. So I have been teaching a ukulele course, and one of the things I teach in it is called the alphabet exercise. And what I do is I try to teach people a lot of really useful ukulele chords by going through a logical sequence and making it very irregular. So what I do is I teach people a lot of these chord shapes. It takes a little while, but eventually they learn the chord shapes. But then they have a hard time remembering the chord shapes, or like what the chord shapes are. So what I do is I organize them into what we call a memory palace. And a memory palace is an organized mnemonic system that is easily retrievable because it's logically organized, and it has all these kind of irregular edges, so it's memorable still. So let me see if I can explain how the alphabet exercise works mnemonically. So one thing that works really well with mnemonics is like ordered systems. It's things that go in a straight logical path. So sometimes what people use is they have you picture a place that you know really well, like the house you grew up in or the street that you live on. Or you can also use like ordered language systems, like you can use numbers, or you can use the alphabet. And I call this the alphabet exercise because I am going to use the alphabet. I'm literally going to go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, done. We're going to go through the alphabet. And I'm also going to use exactly 5 types of chords. So the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a logical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then we're done. I'm going to use each letter and then 5 chords for each letter and then move on. So if I take A, the 5 types of chords I'm going to use are major, minor, dominant 7, major 7, minor 7. And it's always going to be in that order. It takes people a little bit of time to get used to understanding what those chords are and remembering them in that order. But when you do them all the same for every letter, you can organize it and repeat the same thing and actually get it down. So again, I'm going to go through those 5 types of chords on each of the 5 letters, and it takes It usually takes a person like a week or so of intensive lessons to learn all the chord shapes, but then they can't hardly remember that they know them. And the first time I do the alphabet exercise, it usually takes us about a half hour to play through all the chord shapes and for me to explain the whole thing. Usually the second time we go through it takes about 5 minutes. And then after 1 or 2 more times through it, people can play, 7 times 5, 35 chords in about 2 minutes. And they can remember what they are. And then I can play like, okay, F sharp minor. I'll just play this chord shape, and they can usually look at it and remember what it is. So part of the way we do it is we go through the letters of the alphabet, we go through the same types of chords for every one, and then we tell a story. A random story about the constellations, or like the shapes of each thing. And I remember I did this with one of my students. It was a really memorable story. I'll try to explain some of it so you can kind of see how we thought about it. So the A major shape is just these 2 little dots here. She would always just see rabbit ears. Like these 2 little, you just see rabbit ears. And she said the rabbit would like perk up its ear. You pick that up for A minor. And then perk up the other one. You pick up the other finger to go to A7. And then when you put these 2 next to each other, she would see like the rabbit's teeth. Like I'm putting these 2 fingers kind of right next to each other, she would see rabbit's teeth. And then nothing's there. Then all of a sudden, the rabbit dies. Because it's out in nature and bad things happen to rabbits in nature. And yeah, that seems a little bit gruesome. That actually helps with memory palaces, things that really kind of jump out at you. I mean, obviously you don't want to like traumatize yourself, but things that seem a little bit edgy to you in memory palaces are actually really good because they make you remember. And so what I found is that we would do that for every letter. And just by looking at the weird kind of things that your hands do and the numbers of the frets and the motions and just stuff like that, you kind of make up a story and you add these images to this very ordered system. And eventually it's pretty easy to go A major, A minor, A7, A major 7, A minor 7, B minor, B7, B major 7, D minor 7, C minor, C7, C major 7, C minor 7, etc., etc. You can just kind of plow through these sequences of chords really quickly because you've built the story around it. And it's a really good way to organize the things that you learn, to practice them systematically, and to recall them when you need them for different situations. Like I play a game after we do the alphabet exercise with people. I'll just play a random chord. I'll just be like, what is this? And they can look at the shape and say, oh, that looks like the gun from the Mafia. They can just see it in the shape, and they can think the gun from the Mafia is in which part of the story. It's the D major 7 chord. Like I've done this with more than one student who is able to do that. So you can do this with all kinds of things in music. Anything that just seems like, this doesn't make any sense, this seems random, this seems boring, this seems flat. You can add these imaginary dimensions and these ordered system dimensions together to make unmemorable things memorable and make it way easier to remember things you would otherwise not care about, but that you really kind of somehow feel you need to master. So this idea of mnemonics is super useful. There's a lot of ways to do it, but there's an example.